Hey guys, how are you guys? Hopefully you guys are doing well for this last day, let's hope, of online. Hopefully we'll be back to school on Monday. I'm looking forward to doing in-class schooling again. I'm sure you guys are as well, so I can see your smiling faces, although I really wouldn't be able to see your smiling faces behind a mask. But anyway, let's pick up where we left off. We were talking about we had the first triumvirate, fell apart. Caesar kind of took over. Pompey was put. Crassus died. Pompey was put to death by the Egyptians, and Julius Caesar took over. Hopefully, you guys all watched that Julius Caesar video that I posted. Kind of gives you a little bit of fills in the gaps of in what I had been teaching. Kind of talks about his time in Spain and what happened, after Egypt a little bit more. I just kind of summarized the main ideas. Then we had the second triumvirate after Caesar was assassinated with Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. Lepidus didn't last long, and that's where we're going right now. Octavian and Mark Antony both kind of start vying for power a little bit more, and Mark Antony's in Egypt because he's in love with Cleopatra. They have 3 children together. As I mentioned yesterday, Octavian came up with the idea, trying to figure out how to get rid of him. He came up with the idea of reading his will before the Senate, and his will put Cleopatra's children, which were considered Egyptian children, in front of Roman children, which was very scandalous. And now that it was out, he didn't try to hide his relationship anymore. And Octavian got the Senate to declare war on Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Mark Antony tried to meet them in battle, but he lost. And so they fled to Alexandria, and that's what we're picking up today. So they lost in the battle. Now Mark Antony and Cleopatra flee, because in these days, when somebody has a vendetta against you, it is usually not a good thing. That's why, that's one of the reasons why they killed Pompey, because they thought that Caesar was going to kill him and anybody else involved, but he had actually wanted to pardon them. Octavian is not like Caesar, even though he's his grandnephew. He's a little bit more, a little bit more ruthless. So Octavian now besieged Alexandria, where Mark Antony and Cleopatra are, and it was obvious that they would lose, so they knew there was only a matter of time before they would be put to death. So Cleopatra planned to commit suicide. She said, "I'm going to commit suicide," and message was sent to Mark Antony, and thinking he had done so, Mark Antony stabbed himself in the stomach with a sword. This is almost like Romeo and Juliet. If you guys have ever read Romeo and Juliet, they were like star-crossed, in love with one another, and they were from 2 separate areas, and one thought that the other one was going to commit suicide, and so the one did, but then the other one didn't, and then it was a whole thing. It's almost like that in real life, and this happened before Romeo and Juliet. So Mark Antony had thought Cleopatra had already committed suicide, so he went and stabbed himself in the stomach with a sword. But he'd come to find out she actually hadn't done so yet. So his friends brought him to her. As he's dying, to be able to see her before he dies. He actually thought she was already dead, but then she found out she wasn't. So she held him as he was dying, and he died in her arms. And so now that he's dead, Cleopatra, and this is a picture of some medieval version. That's not necessarily what they look like. This is the English version of what they looked like. They always make people look like themselves when they paint them. But so she met with, and then she met with Octavian. She actually didn't kill herself, not yet, but she met with Octavian, and one of the things that she didn't want to happen, she didn't want to be publicly humiliated, and so she wanted him to promise that he wouldn't hurt her children and that he wouldn't publicly humiliate her, but he actually planned on bringing her back to Rome and publicly humiliating her, for however long, before he killed her, and she just didn't want to go through the embarrassment, because he wanted to be a victory. A lot of times in those days, a victor would lead the people that he conquered in a victory parade, and as I beat them and I'm so much greater than them. And so she finds out that he's planning on doing this, and she's like, "No, I want to kill myself." He actually puts guards there to make sure she doesn't, but she ended up escaping them, and she killed herself. There's some controversy on how she actually did it, but the one of the stories is that she used venomous serpents. She laid in a bed or a casket and had venomous serpents thrown all over herself instead of facing the embarrassment. And so, unfortunately, Octavian also likely killed two of her sons, even though they were kids at the time. The two boys, he'd probably let the girl live, but her two sons, one of which was with Mark Antony, and he definitely killed Caesarion. He definitely killed him. That's known, but he most likely killed at least one of her children that she had with Mark Antony. So her plans of hoping that Caesarion would become the next Caesar did not really work out. So Cleopatra and Mark Antony both died in the same year. Remember I mentioned that they both died in the same year because Octavian, this guy right here, I should say, this guy right there, he comes to power and he just cleans house when he comes to power. Now this is called the Age of Augustus. Now you might be like, Augustus? I thought his name was Octavian. Well, though Octavian claimed he was restoring the Republic, he gave some powers to the Senate. He was in truth the first Roman emperor. He's not a dictator, he's an emperor. He proclaims himself emperor. And the Senate gave him the name Augustus. So he gets this new name meaning revered one. So Augustus was kind of like a title. His name was Octavian, but they gave him this name Augustus. So you might have heard Caesar Augustus or Augustus Caesar. This is what he is called. His name was Octavian, but Augustus Caesar Augustus comes right after Julius Caesar. It's his grandnephew. It's Octavian. So he gets the name Augustus from the Senate, meaning revered one. It's bold, so you have to make sure you remember that. They also gave him the title of imperator over his army. So the word imperator was a Roman word, meant that he was commander-in-chief, but from that word imperator, we get the word emperor. So the word emperor has roots in Latin because it comes from imperator, which is an army commander. Much of Octavian's power came from his continuing control of the army. From his control of the army, Octavian, now Caesar Augustus, stabilized the frontiers of the Roman Empire, and he conquered some new areas, so now he is emperor. Now you might be like, what's the difference between an emperor and a dictator? The dictator, remember, the way Rome handled it was they would elect a dictator, and that dictator had emergency powers, but they had absolute power, but it was dictator for a set amount of time. In the video, if you watch the video, they say they elected the Senate, those senators that liked him, and the people that liked him, elected him dictator for another 10 years. Like they said, okay, we want you to be dictator for the next 10 years. See, there's a set time limit. You have absolute power, but there's a set time limit. This emperor job was like, I am emperor until I die. You know, kind of like a king, but a king over a vast empire. So he stabilized everything. Even though he's kind of a cruel, ruthless guy, he did bring a lot of organization and stability to the Roman Empire, stabilized it for years to come. And one of the things that he did was he wanted to try to figure out the best way to tax his people. And he wanted to make sure it was efficient, because there was a lot of inefficiency. The way that taxes were done wasn't very organized, and he had a desire to make sure everything was organized. So he decided he wanted to tax the people more effectively. So he sent out a message saying, I want everybody to go back to the city of your birth, where your family is from. So if you were, let's say you live in, your family's from Rockland right now, but when you grow up and go to college, you go to college in New York, and then you move afterwards to Montana, okay? And then your kids move from Montana, to Florida. You'd have to go back to where your family is from, so all of you kind of come back to Rockland. For the purpose of this, they're going to do a census. What a census is like counting how many people are in each area. And so, because he wants to be organized, he wants to know how many people are in each area, the representation for taxation purposes, how many people are in this area. Everybody had to kind of go back over a few months span, go back to the city of where your ancestry is from, and you had to stay there for a few months and wait to be counted. And so, it's what I say here in this bold part, what I basically just said. In an effort to tax his new empire more efficiently, he had all the people within his empire return to the city that their family was from, so they could take a census. I don't know if this is sounding familiar to anybody. People having to go back to the city where their family was from. There's a very famous story that we know that takes place during this time. This included a young carpenter from Nazareth who needed to return 90 miles to Bethlehem with his very pregnant wife. Hopefully all of you bells should be ringing about who this is. That would be Joseph and Mary, who was pregnant at the time. So this whole thing, this whole entire thing where Julius Caesar was assassinated, then there was the second triumvirate when they got rid of one of them, then the two, Mark Antony and Octavian, had this battle and this struggle for power. Octavian wins. Then he's the first emperor now, and he has to figure out how to reorganize his empire so that he can kind of organize things, and because he was only in charge of the West at that point, but he wants to be in charge of the East as well, and the East includes Israel, and he's like, I want to figure out how to tax them more efficiently, but I need to know where everybody's from. So you know what? Everybody go back to your city of birth. This is why Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And it's interesting because if you look at the Old Testament, Jesus, it talked about the Messiah being called a Nazarene, being born in Bethlehem, and being called out of Egypt. Now those three things, if we aren't nowadays, we don't think they're contradictory, but if you were reading the Old Testament without knowing anything about Jesus, they would seem very contradictory. How can it be called a Nazarene, meaning from Nazareth? How can he be born in Bethlehem? And how can he be called out of Egypt? That doesn't really make sense. How can you have all three things? Well, Bible prophecy is 100% accurate, because what happened was he was from Nazareth. That was his hometown. But before he was born, Caesar Augustus called them, everybody go back to your city where your family's from. His family, before he was born, Joseph and Mary, had to go to Bethlehem because Joseph's family line was from Bethlehem. Actually, Mary's as well. Why? Who was in their family line? David. David's from Bethlehem, right? And so they had to go back to Bethlehem to be counted. And Bethlehem's a little tiny town, and there's a lot of people who are descendants of David, so the town was overrun with people. That's why they couldn't find a room, right? So he's born in Bethlehem, but then they're kind of chilling in Bethlehem for a little while. And what happens? Herod hears from the wise men that there was a king going to be born in Bethlehem, and Herod, who's in charge of that area, he doesn't like that. He doesn't want another king to be challenging him, so he wants him killed. And an angel comes to Joseph and Mary and says, you guys got to get out of here and flee, because Herod's after you. So where do they go? They flee down to Egypt for a couple of years until they're told by the angel it's safe to go back because Herod dies. And so they leave Egypt, called out of Egypt, and then go back to the hometown. They don't need to be in Bethlehem anymore. Where do they go back? They go back to Nazareth. So that's why the Bible is 100% accurate. All those three things were evident of Jesus, and those are three things that had to be true of the Messiah in order for him to be considered the Messiah. Those are three things that were qualifications of somebody before they could be considered the Messiah. They had to have these three things, and Jesus qualified all three of those things. He had all three of those things happen with him because, and the Bethlehem part of it, and really indirectly the Egypt part of it, was all due to Octavian being like, I want to tax my kingdom more effectively. So, and we will talk about the successors of Augustus afterward, but just know from today, Octavian became the first emperor of Rome. He wasn't the last emperor, he was the first one. Julius Caesar doesn't count as an emperor, he's actually a dictator. So Augustus was the first emperor. His name was Augustus. You need to know Octavian was Augustus. He was given the name by the Senate. And you need to know, definitely for the test, be able to explain to me how Jesus connects to Octavian, how Jesus connects to Caesar Augustus, which is, in my last 30 seconds, I'm going to sum up for you again, which is that Caesar Augustus wanted to tax his people more effectively, kind of organize his empire. So he told everybody to go back to the city that they were from, the family city, and that included Joseph having to go back to Bethlehem since he was a descendant of David. Okay? So hopefully you guys all watched that Julius Caesar video. If you haven't watched that, do watch that. I may or may not try to look for another video for you guys to watch today, Friday. If you see it there, watch it. All right? See you guys later. Bye.